Just another quiet Tuesday, the kind where the clock ticks louder than it should. I was standing at the bank counter, purse tucked neatly under my arm, waiting to withdraw a little cash for groceries when the young clerk smiled and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Granson." "Granson!" My smile froze. "I'm sorry, dear. What did you call me?" She looked puzzled, glanced at her screen, then repeated it slower. "Mrs. Evelyn Granson. Your signature's already verified in our system." The name echoed inside me like a draft through an empty hallway. Granson. I'd never heard it before in my life. My husband's name was Moore, always had been. And yet, there it was. My birth date, my address, my pension account, all under a name I'd never heard before. That's when my heart began to race, because I realized the woman they thought I was didn't exist. If you're hearing my story now, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And please, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, where women like me turn silence into strength. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about trust and about family. My name is Evelyn. I'm 67, a widow, and I used to teach math at the middle school down on Elm Street. After Harold died, my Harold, I kept working for a while because it was good to have the routine. Numbers were always steady. People are messy, numbers aren't. After I retired, I did bookkeeping for a few small businesses around town, the kind of work that let you be precise and quiet and useful. That's how I like it. Practical, reliable, enough. My house looks like the life I built with Harold. Small, tidy, with a garden he loved more than he loved me. He always said, "It's the only thing I can keep alive without you fussing at me." The paint's a little chipped on the porch rail. The hydrangeas blaze in June, and the living room still smells faintly of the shaving soap he used the last winter he came home from the hospital. I drive an old sedan he taught me to change the oil on, the one with the dent in the rear where a mailbox and I once had a misunderstanding. Modest pension, a savings account. Harold and I padded carefully over 4 decades. Nothing flashy, nothing anyone would envy, but it's mine. It always felt like mine. Mark, my only son, lives about 20 minutes away now. He's in his mid-30s, smart and quick, the kind of man who grew up learning code like I learned times tables. He's a financial advisor. People around town say he's ambitious, which is a polite way of saying he's hungry. He's got a neat haircut, a phone that buzzes too much, and a smile that knows how to smooth over discomfort. He used to come over on Sundays with a casserole and the newspaper. Those visits thinned after his wife Jenna and their jobs got busier, but when he did come, he'd sit at my kitchen table and talk numbers with a confidence I always admired. He understood money differently than I did. It was less memory and more tool, less story and more instrument. A year after Harold died, Mark called one afternoon. "Mom," he said, voice careful, "you've done everything for so long. Let me take care of your finances. Let me set things up so you can relax." The tone was gentle, considerate. It sounded like love. I told him no at first. I liked balancing my checkbook. I liked knowing where each dollar lived, but he was persistent. "It's just for convenience," he said. "I'll set up auto payments for your utilities, sort out the pension deposits so they land in the right places. You won't have to lift a finger." He made it sound like a favor and a vacation rolled into one. Because of Harold, I still liked being independent more than I liked being right. I told myself I'd let him try it for a month. So he came over with a folder and his laptop. He sat across from me and explained things in that warm business tone he used with clients. He printed documents, authorization forms, direct deposit changes, durable power of attorney paperwork. He asked me to initial a few lines here and there, to sign for convenience, and to date as of today. I did. I signed the way I'd signed permission slips when Mark was small, trusting. A few small moments after that should have made me pause. He would correct the way I read statements. "You mix up numbers sometimes, Mom," he said once, smiling in a way that wasn't unkind but was sure. "I'll set up an alert if anything looks odd." On another afternoon, I caught him tucking a sheet into his briefcase that listed several accounts next to one label I didn't recognize. "Granson?" I asked quietly. He looked at it and then at me. "Oh, that's a corporate client. Irrelevant. The word slid away like a coin dropped between sofa cushions. I didn't press. He set up new apps on my phone. He said they would send me notifications, and I nodded like a woman who had raised a son and then trusted him to show her how to use the world he'd been building while she'd been making dinner and packing lunches. There were simple reassurances. I'll always run big decisions by you, Mom. There were little conveniences, online access, automatic transfers so I didn't have to drive to the bank 2 towns over. There were smiles and coffee and the easy cadence of a son taking care of his mother. Weeks passed. Some things felt lighter. The bills paid on time. My pension landed in the account without the usual fuss. I liked that some evenings were quieter. I let myself believe this was the kind of care Harold would have wanted, practical, peaceful, efficient. And then the first thing that unsettled me arrived. A white envelope stamped with the bank's crest. I set it on the kitchen table beside the salt shaker and the stack of catalogs. The envelope felt ordinary, but the name on the front wasn't. It read, Mrs. Evelyn Granson. I turned it over. The postmark was recent. My chest tightened in a way that felt unfamiliar. I knew every way Harold and I had ever been named. Moore and Evelyn, Mrs. Harold Moore. But Granson? I had never used it, never heard it in a greeting card or at a funeral or in a neighbor's gossip. I opened the letter with the polite steadiness I learned in the classroom when students tore at each other's hearts. The words inside were even stranger. We are pleased to inform you that your new joint account with Granson Holdings, LLC, has been fully activated. My hand went cold against the paper. For a brief moment, I let myself ask the question any sane person would, had I made a mistake. Then I remembered Mark's voice, the forms he'd asked me to sign for convenience, the gentle practice corrections. I set the envelope down, folded my hands, and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way I taught an auditorium full of anxious kids before a test. I was patient. I was careful. I was not yet afraid. But the pebble had been put in my shoe. The name Granson sat there on my table and would not stop rubbing until I found out why it had been put there. The next morning I made myself a pot of coffee, the way I always do, dark, no sugar, and I told myself I would go to the bank like a sensible person, not storm in, not accuse anyone, just ask a question. There are ways to solve things without drama. Harold used to say the same. Evelyn, ask once, ask nicely, then listen. So I dressed in a cardigan and my comfortable shoes, tucked Harold's old handkerchief in my pocket because it made me feel less alone, and drove the 2 miles to First County Bank. The branch on Main has a glass door that chimes when you enter. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and printer ink. I sat with the envelope folded in my hand like an awkward confessional. When my name was called, I went up to the counter and the young woman at the desk steered me toward a private office. Mr. Allen will be with you in a moment, she said. Mr. Allen looked every bit the part, pressed shirt, soft voice, a name tag polished to a shine. He stood when I entered, offered a chair, and unfolded a stack of papers with the same measured care I used to teach students about neat work. Mrs. Granson, he said pleasantly, looking up from his screen, so glad you could make it. Congratulations on the new consolidation. It should make things simpler for you. The word congratulations landed like a courtesy phrase. My mouth must have opened because he blinked and repeated it, slower this time, as if checking my comprehension. I'm sorry, I said. Did you say Granson? Yes, Mrs. Evelyn Granson. It's all here in the system. He tapped his monitor. The name flashed in black letters. We've consolidated your accounts into a joint trust with Granson Holdings. You had a durable power of attorney assigned to Mr. Mr. Mark Granson about 2 months ago. He authorized the consolidation to better manage your assets. My head felt stuffed with cotton. I repeated it slowly, the way you say a spelling word to a child. Power of attorney, assigned to Mark Granson? He adjusted his glasses. Yes, he signed the paperwork here. With the consolidation, your pension payments will be routed through the trust, mortgage payments, and vehicle registrations managed centrally to avoid missed payments and reduce fees. It's cleaner, Mrs. Granson. Easier. I had to laugh. except it sounded thin in my throat. My husband's name was Harold Moore, I said. I've always been Evelyn Moore. I don't know anyone named Granson. Mr. Allen softened into that practiced sympathy. Banks give a client who's confused by jargon. Sometimes family names change with marriages, ma'am, or a legal name change occurs we weren't informed of. But all the documentation lists Mr. Granson as your designated agent, and he provided identification matching that name when setting up the trust. He pushed a photocopy across the desk. I touched the paper like it might be warm. The signature looked like Mark's, the same hurried loop at the end, the same slight slant. But the printed name beneath it read, M. Granson. The notary stamp beside it bore a date I remembered because it was the same week we scattered Harold's ashes. Did I sign this? I asked. My throat was dry. The terrible thing about grief is it blurs receipts and eulogies until you cannot tell which is which. We have your initial here, Mr. Allen said kindly. If you suspect forgery, we can investigate. But the forms were processed with valid identification for Mr. Granson at the time. The practical part of me, the teacher who taught students to show work, spoke next. Compare signatures, call witnesses, check the notary, the sensible voice. I asked for everything I had signed. He handed photocopies. I traced the pen strokes with my finger the way I once traced a child's shaky handwriting. The loops were marks, the posture of the letters, the pressure, the hurriedness, but the typed name did not fit the man I had raised. I left the bank with paper in my bag and a slow, sinking feeling in the pit of me. The drive home was quiet. I thought of every permission slip and every medical release I had ever signed, and wondered if, somewhere between one form and the next, someone had slipped a thread into my life and started tugging. At my kitchen table, I dialed Mark. The phone clicked. My hands were steady. I had taught adolescents how to stay calm under pressure. I could do the same now. He answered on the second ring. Hey, Mom, everything okay? Mark, I said, keeping my voice even, did you file anything with the bank under the name Granson? There was a beat, long enough that it bothered me. Then his voice, all practiced ease. Oh, that, yeah, I handled the consolidation for you. Thought it would make things simpler. You said you were tired of dealing with accounts, remember? I remember saying I was tired, I replied slowly, but I don't remember authorizing a name change. Why Granson? He repeated the name like it was a foreign flavor. Granson is a corporate alias for the trust. Lots of firms use an alias. It's legal, Mom. I set it up so creditors couldn't come after the accounts while we sorted things out. You don't need to worry. His tone was coaxing, the way it is when a parent soothes a skinned knee. I wanted to believe him, but I had photocopies in my bag like small accusing mirrors. Did I sign any documents giving you power of attorney? I asked. Just some forms we needed to move things, he said too quickly. You signed a few pages when I was there. You were fine. It was just to streamline bill payments. I'm doing this because I love you. You mix up numbers sometimes, Mom. There it was, the correction, the gentle undermining I had heard before. Sorrow flickered through me, and something colder with it. Mark, I said, measured, I want to see the paperwork. I'll email you copies, he replied. But trust me, Mom, it's all above board. Please, don't make a fuss. I thanked him and hung up. The receiver felt heavier in my hand than it should have. I folded Harold's handkerchief and smoothed it. The old cotton was a small anchor. I told myself calmly, gather facts, compare signatures, call the notary, be careful, don't make a scene. But under that thin, sensible voice, a pebble the size of a name kept rubbing. Granson. It would not stop until I had an answer, and I would not let the question go unanswered. When the world starts to wobble beneath your feet, you look for steady things to hold, a routine, a smell, a memory. For me, those anchors were small and ordinary. Harold's mug with the chip on the rim, the way he folded his shirts on Sundays, the notes he left in my sewing basket so I wouldn't forget an appointment. We built a life the way sensible people build houses, brick by careful brick, not by flash or chance. Harold and I were not rich. We were steady. He worked at the plant and I taught math. We saved in the slow way you save when you know the future will need a cushion, a little each week, coin jars tucked behind the flour, an extra shift on weekends. We bought second-hand furniture and kept it until it earned a story. When Mark got into college, we quietly made it happen. Harold and I sat at the kitchen table with a letter and a cold cup of tea and rearranged our lives. I picked up bookkeeping evenings. Harold worked overtime. No heroics, just the stubborn, neighborly kind of love that pays tuition and fixes a dented fender. Mark went off to school with an old duffel and a head full of dreams. He wrote home in looping letters at first. Later, the letters turned into occasional texts, then the polite distance of adulthood. We paid his tuition. We co-signed his first lease. When he called to say his car had died and he needed help with the deposit, Harold wrote a check without a second thought. When he graduated, we stood at the edge of a crowded hall, and I clapped until my hands ached. Pride was a kind of warmth that lasted. We never expected it to turn cold. After Harold grew ill, the house changed. There were more doctor appointments, fewer Sunday drives. The routines that once steadied us cracked a little, and Mark came around more to help. We were grateful, we were tired. When Harold passed, the silence in the house was a presence you could trip over. I miss him still in ways that make my chest ache, not just the man, but the safety he carried in small gestures. Some nights I still wake with his hand on my shoulder, steadied by a phantom from another time. In those months after the funeral, Mark was different. He'd always been the quick sort who could make a spreadsheet sing, the son who could fix a router after 2 emails. But grief seemed to embolden him. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd always believed doors opened for him. Where I saw a son who'd outgrown childhood and was now finding his footing, he began to sound like a man collecting entitlement, a tilt in his voice when he spoke of investments, a casual suggestion that I should let him take care of things. I shrugged it off at first. People change in grief. We forgive. We make room. I kept Harold's things in order. His cardigan on the chair, his glasses on the nightstand, the stack of crosswords he never quite finished. And tucked among the papers in his desk, I found the last letter he ever wrote me. He'd written it the way he always had, small, deliberate letters, a little scrawl at the end that made me smile because it was his. I hadn't read it since the funeral. Part of me had left that letter folded against my heart like a talisman. That afternoon I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in my hands. The handwriting trembled a little where he had written, maybe it was the medication or the fatigue. He always saved the important bits for the end. I unfolded the page and read it aloud to myself, the words soft like a hymn. Evelyn, he had written, if anything happens to me, and we both know life isn't always kind, promise me one thing. Promise me you'll never let anyone take your dignity. If they are kind, let them care. But if they treat you as less than you are, stand up. Use the paperwork, use the law, but never let anyone make you small. I love you, Harold. The last line had a faint blot where his pen lingered. I pressed the paper to my lips. He had always been my quiet counsel, and the letter felt like a hand on my shoulder long after he was gone. It hurt to think anyone would try. How strange to be 67 and still learning the language of betrayal in your own family. I remembered the late nights balancing ledgers, the temple of order I'd built around small accounts, Harold checking in on the numbers with a half laugh when I corrected a misplaced decimal. Don't let someone take your dignity, Harold had written. It sounded like both a prayer and a command. I thought of all we'd done for Mark, the tuition, the deposits, the favors. I told myself the son shows gratitude in his bones, but gratitude isn't a deposit. It's a habit. Habits can change. I opened the stack of photocopies Mark had sent and compared the scrawl of signatures with the old ones I kept in a tin box. Receipts, mortgage papers, Harold's initials beside mine. I thought of the durable power of attorney Mr. Allen had shown me. Why had I initialed? When had I stopped asking questions or started trusting too quickly? The memory of Harold's letter was both a blessing and a burden. He had told me to protect myself. He had given me permission to stand. That permission bloomed in me like light. I took a stiff, covered lesson notebook and wrote, in careful block letters, documents to audit. Under it, I listed bank forms, power of attorney, trust documents, notary, dates, signatures, witnesses. For each I made a note who to call, where copies might be kept. It was a quiet, practical thing, the only kind of revenge I believed in. I didn't want fireworks, I wanted facts. Harold had asked me to keep my dignity. I would start by quietly checking every paper I had ever signed. I would protect what was ours, not in anger, but in the steady way numbers get balanced when you check them twice. That evening I made myself a cup of tea, set the notebook beside Harold's letter, and breathed. The work would be slow, it would be methodical. I'd never been in a hurry to do the right thing, and now I had all the time I needed to proof it properly. After betrayal comes stillness, that pause between disbelief and action. For 2 days I moved through the house underwater, drawers full of ghosts in my own handwriting, proof I had once authored my life. On the third morning I woke before dawn, made coffee strong enough to wake a mule, and laid everything out on the kitchen table: Harold's letter, my audit notebook, the bank photocopies. The sun hadn't risen yet. The light was gray and steady, good for sorting truth from fog. I wrote at the top of a clean page, next step. The county registry was a narrow office tucked behind the courthouse. The clerk behind the counter wore half-moon glasses on a chain. I need to check some property records, I told her, sliding my license across the counter. For myself, she smiled politely. Name, Evelyn Moore. She typed for a moment, then frowned. You mean Evelyn Granson? There it was again, that false echo of my own name. No, I said slowly. Moore. My husband was Harold Moore. Well, ma'am, our database shows a transfer last year. Property reassigned under the Granson Family Trust. You're still listed as occupant, but the trust owns the deed. The words landed with a dull weight. Who authorized the transfer? She scrolled again. Power of attorney on file, Mark Granson. That's your son? I nodded, throat dry. That's my son, yes, but my name has never been Granson. She hesitated, hearing something in my voice. You might want to talk to the notary who processed it. We can print the record for you. I took the papers, a stack of official pages stamped in blue. My signature sat at the bottom like a stranger wearing my face. Same loops, same pressure. But the date was wrong. I'd been at a medical appointment that day. The initials beside it were Mark's. Outside, the autumn air bit through my cardigan. My house, the little place Harold and I had paid off penny by penny, was no longer mine. It belonged to a trust controlled entirely by my son. I drove to the DMV next. The clerk looked up my record and frowned. Says here your vehicle's registered under the same trust, she said. Was that a voluntary transfer? I almost laughed. Apparently everything's voluntary when someone forges your name. By the time I reached the pension office, my voice was hoarse from repeating the same questions. The clerk, a younger woman with kind eyes, pulled up my file and shook her head. Your payments were redirected 2 months ago to an account under the name Evelyn Granson. How is that possible? You'll need legal proof of identity to reverse it, she said gently. Legal proof. I had a birth certificate, a driver's license, a marriage license, all with the name Evelyn Moore. But somehow that wasn't enough to make me real anymore. That evening I sat again at the kitchen table, papers spread like battle plans. My entire life had been rerouted through a phantom name. My savings, my pension, my home, my car, all gathered neatly into a trust controlled by the person I trusted most. I didn't cry. I'd already done that in smaller ways. Instead, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Mr. Lewis? My voice cracked slightly. It's Evelyn Moore, Harold's widow. You remember us? There was a pause, then a chuckle warm as cedar wood. Evelyn Moore. Of course I remember. Harold and I notarized half the town's mortgages back in the day. How are you holding up? I'm sorting something out, I said, and I think you might be the only person who can help. He agreed to meet the next morning at his bungalow, a small house that smelled of pipe tobacco and lemon polish. His hands trembled as he poured coffee, but his eyes were sharp. I laid the documents on the table, and he handled them like fragile artifacts. Let's see here, he murmured, adjusting his glasses. Signatures, stamps, seals. He reached for a magnifying glass. You always looped your E tight, he said half to himself. See this one? It's wider. Whoever signed this was mimicking your hand but didn't know your rhythm. He pointed to the ink. Different viscosity, digital overlay, not pen ink. See how the pressure's even? That's toner, not handwriting. He flipped another page. This notary stamp was copied from the format of my retired seal. Someone's been creative. I sat very still. So these are forged? Every one of them, he said. Clever but sloppy in the details. They used real templates, maybe even access to an old notary file. But they made one mistake. I looked up. Which one? He smiled almost sadly. You sign with confidence, even when nervous. But these signatures, they hesitate in the middle of your name, like someone pretending to be you but afraid of being caught. The clock ticked between us. So what do I do? I asked quietly. You gather everything, originals, copies, bank correspondence, document it all, then go to the fraud division. But first, he slid one paper toward me. Keep this one safe. The ink doesn't match the stamp's pressure. It's your proof. He folded his hands, eyes steady on mine. Whoever forged these knew your hand, he said softly, but not your heart. The words landed like both benediction and warning, because my heart, the part that believed Mark would never hurt me, was breaking. And the woman they'd forged on paper wasn't half as dangerous as the one they'd just awakened. When you're old, people mistake silence for weakness. They think pauses mean confusion, and kindness means you've run out of fight. That suited me just fine. After Mr. Lewis and Sophie agreed to help, I put on the mask the world expected, the harmless widow. I called and asked him to explain passwords again, pretended to fumble with the remote. He liked being the expert, the one who knows how to fold the world into neat columns. People who steal need to believe you're too fragile to stop them. Mom, he said one evening over dinner, you really should let me consolidate that last savings account, just so it's neat. Less for you to keep track of. He grinned, the same proud smile that once made my heart swell. Now it made my stomach turn. I nodded sweetly, pretending to reread a recipe card while my mind calculated timing and witnesses. When he left with a kiss on my cheek and my keys in his hand, he said he'd get the car detailed. I called Mr. Lewis. It's time, I told him. We met at his kitchen table. The magnifying glass sat like an old instrument. I've got a friend at the bank, he said. Young, sharp, Sophie. She understands records the way I used to understand ledgers. The next morning I walked into the bank in my Sunday best, pearls, navy skirt, pressed blouse. Sophie met me by the counter, neat bun, cautious smile. Mr. Fee, Lewis told me you might come, she said quietly. Let's talk where it's private. She led me into a small office and clicked a monitor toward me. A list of transfers filled the screen. See these? She said. Pension draws, CDs, your late husband's joint account, they all funnel into Granson Holdings, LLC. My breath caught. That's his. He said it was consulting. Sophie's fingers moved fast. It's more than that. An investment shell. Your money's funneled through it into property, stocks, even crypto. They're laundering it in plain sight. But every transfer leaves a trail. We just need one clean, monitored tie from your account to his shell, live, so compliance can lock it down. Mr. Lewis joined us later with his folder of notarized evidence. We'll need to bait him, he said. Let him think you're still under his thumb. Sophie nodded. Approve one last consolidation. I'll flag it. Compliance will see it, and the system will freeze him before he can move a cent. For the first time since the registry visit, something close to safety warmed me. An old notary, a young clerk, ordinary people acting like a jury. We set the night for Thursday. I invited Mark to dinner because habits are comfortable and predictable. I set the table with Harold's china, white with a thin blue rim, the set we used on anniversaries. The rain began in a hush, the kind that makes small rooms feel private. We ate. We spoke of markets and algorithms, of the way the world sounds different behind a screen. I nodded at all the right moments, smiled when he explained things he thought I couldn't understand. When the plates were cleared and coffee poured, I said as casually as I could, you were right about consolidating. That last little account, it still sits separate. Maybe you should tidy that up too. His eyes brightened. I can take care of it tonight, Mom. Just sign one document so I can start the transfer. Of course, dear. I smiled and reached for my glasses. In the kitchen, I breathed deep, checked my phone. A single text from Sophie blinked, monitoring active. Proceed when ready. I carried the paper back to the table. He scrolled his phone, confident. All set? He asked. Yes, darling. I leaned over the paperwork. He pointed. I wrote my name in slow, deliberate strokes, the steady, practiced signature of a woman who signed ledgers and permission slips, not the wobbly forgery they printed. He folded the document with the casual triumph of a man sure victory will be his. You'll thank me for this, Mom. I'm just making sure you're comfortable. He didn't notice the faint digital recorder tucked under the table. He didn't notice Sophie's quiet ping as she flagged the live transfer. He only noticed his own success, the easy certainty of someone who thought the world owed him. By the time he left, humming to himself, the law was watching. Sophie had marked the transfer. Compliance was tracing it in real time. Mr. Lewis had the notarized discrepancies ready. The authorities were on standby. The trap closed before he reached the car. I stood at the window and watched his taillights vanish into the drizzle. The streetlights made the driveway glow like a stage. He taught me to trust systems, I said to Harold's empty chair. Now the system will teach him. I told Mark we were meeting at the bank to finalize the paperwork. He sounded pleased, like a boy going to collect a prize. He still expected obedience. He still expected me to be grateful. On a chill morning, the color of old pewter, I dressed in my best cardigan. Some days demand that kind of dignity. Mr. Lewis arrived first with the evidence folder. Sophie met us by the side entrance, cheeks flushed, eyes steady. Detective Ramirez followed with 2 officers, and Mr. Allen waited in his office, hands folded, his name tag catching the light. They asked if I preferred to do this quietly. People talk, one officer offered. I thought of pension notices rerouted like a diverted river, of Harold's note about never giving away your dignity, of signatures that wore my name like a mask. No, I said. Let him see it all. Mark arrived late, hair perfect, phone tucked at his ear. He stepped into the lobby with the easy swagger of someone used to not being questioned. He kissed my cheek, the familiar gesture of a son who wants to keep the peace. He didn't know peace was the last thing on my mind. Mr. Allen led us into his office. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. I sat, Mark perched near the window, the view like a small stage he thought would keep him safe. Mr. Allen set one sheet on the desk. Before we begin, he said, I need to read a statement from the bank and a transcript of a live flag transfer. Sophie sat beside me and squeezed my hand. Mr. Lewis stood where he always did, steady, the magnifying glass, an old instrument of truth. Mr. Allen read, his voice making the room small. Our system flagged a transfer from Evelyn Moore's account at 8:04 p.m. on Thursday. A transfer request totaling $78,450 was initiated to Granson Holdings, LLC. The bank froze the transfer pending investigation. Independent verification by notary specialist Harold Lewis shows multiple forged signatures and inconsistencies with notarized seals. Digital authentication traces certain authorizations to devices registered to Mark Granson. For a moment, Mark's composure held. Then, like glass under strain, it cracked. You don't understand, Mom, he said, voice smooth at first. I was protecting your assets, making things simpler, saving you the worry. Detective Ramirez's voice was flat and precise. Mark Edward Granson, you are under arrest for fraudulent transfer of funds, forgery, identity theft, and fraud by deception. You are accused of creating false power of attorney documents, forging signatures, and orchestrating transfers of pension, property, and vehicle ownership into assets you controlled. While the officers moved quietly, Mark tried to laugh it off, then to explain. There are investments, he started. Investments that originated with unauthorized transfers from Mrs. Moore's accounts, Mr. Allen said. Sophie leaned forward. He initiated a transfer using a spoofed internal ID on our system, she said. We recorded the session and we flagged the discrepancies. He bypassed required verification. The room held its breath. A teller stopped mid-typing. Clients glanced up. The hum of the bank narrowed until everything centered on the folder on the desk and the man beside the window. An officer showed Mark the warrant. He pulled himself up, sputtering, as if astonished to be the subject of the law. The cuff went on, the soft metallic click loud in the small office. It is a particular humiliation, not the loud kind, but the efficient kind. A hand reaches, a cuff closes, a life made public in a single mechanical sound. "You were right, Mark," I said, not with triumph, but with a sorrow like a struck bell. "I am too old to believe lies." He turned, and for a second his eyes sought refuge. The boy who used to bring me tulips when he was 9 was still somewhere in that face. Maybe he mouthed, "I'm sorry." I could not be sure. Sometimes apologies arrive too late and sound like a folded note left by the door. They let him out. People watched for a moment and then, like a tide, went back to business. A woman at the counter dabbed at her eyes. A child in the lobby tugged at a parent's sleeve. Mr. Lewis sat down hard. The magnifying glass clattered. Sophie leaned on the desk and exhaled a small, steady sound of relief. Detective Ramirez folded his hands. "Mrs. Moore, we'll need a formal statement," he said. "Yes," I answered. My voice was steady. "Do what you must." No shout came for me when the door closed. I did not clap or dance. I only sat and let the quiet fill the room, which felt right. Justice, when it arrives, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in with a badge and a folder, and the truth makes its own small, precise noise. Mr. Allen closed the folder and looked at me. "On behalf of the bank, we're sorry this happened," he said. "Thank you," I said. "Make sure the records are corrected." We left together. Sophie walked me to the curb and stood under the overhang until I was seated in my car. Mr. Lewis patted my shoulder in that way older men do when a thing has been done properly and quietly. There was no triumph in the gesture, only a plain solidity. Driving home, the town slid past like pages. The driveway to my house looked the same, the paint slightly flaking where Harold had promised to fix it next weekend. Inside, the radio hummed, a neighbor watered his lawn, a dog barked. The ordinary world had resumed, as it always does, around moments it barely understands. The hard part wasn't getting the money back. It was teaching the only lesson he'd learned, that systems both protect and punish, that trust can be weaponized, and that the quiet witness of paper and law cuts truer than any shout. I pulled into the garage and switched off the engine. The house smelled faintly of lemon and old books. I took Harold's last note from my bag and smoothed it on the passenger seat. "Protect your dignity," he had written. I tucked it back into my cardigan and walked to the front door, steady, hands empty of fury. Behind me, someone learned the cost of a ledger balanced on lies. In front of me, the rest of my life waited. Simple, ordinary, and finally mine again. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it comes in envelopes, thick ones, stamped by the county prosecutor's office, and you open them on the kitchen table like a small, deliberate ritual. Detective Ramirez came to the front porch the week after Mark's arrest. He stood there with his hat in his hands, quiet and steady. "Mrs. Test." "More," he said. "We filed full charges: fraud, forgery, identity theft, exploitation of an elder, and attempted embezzlement." He handed me a packet. I held it the way you hold a heavy truth, with both hands in careful breath. He explained what would follow: court dates, asset recovery, restitution, words I never imagined would thread themselves through my life. Still, hearing them feel real made the betrayal feel less like a fog and more like a thing we could measure and fix. A week later, the county clerk sent formal notice. The fraudulent transfers had been reversed, the trust dissolved, the title to my house restored to Evelyn May Moore, my pension redirected to the right account, my car registration corrected. My name, the name I had lived with, the name Harold had loved, was back where it belonged. I walked into the house that evening and paused in the entryway. The place smelled like lemon polish and old paper, like the pages of Harold's favorite book. Standing there, I felt the house was not empty so much as reclaimed. It was the same house, but somehow steadier, as if it had been righted. I went to the dining room where Mark used to sit on holidays, tapping his fork, teasing me about the biscuits. The chair looked smaller than I remembered. I moved it aside and wiped the table, slow, steady strokes. Dust came up in soft clouds. I wasn't trying to scrub the past away. I was simply putting everything back in its place. The table deserved that. Cleanliness first, then memory. My mailbox filled over the next few days. Cousins, an old neighbor, even an aunt from Oregon. Their letters were simple. You didn't deserve this. We're proud of you. Tiny lanterns of recognition from people who hadn't spoken to me in years. I folded each one, set them in a little stack, and read them as if they were small offerings of ordinary kindness. Then came the restitution envelope. Not all the money, never all, but a legal recovery, a portion returned. I put the check on the counter and stared. Money recovered from betrayal carries a particular weight. It is not the same as wages earned. It feels like a bruise beginning to heal, useful, but a reminder of where the strike landed. I thought about what to do with it. I could have spent it on a new set of curtains, a short trip, something small and private. But what had hurt me most was vulnerability left unchecked, other elders in town who might not spot the signs Mark hid so cleverly. So I drove to the community center where Harold and I once volunteered. In the lobby sat a donation box for the Elder Rights Legal Fund, a small program that helps seniors get legal help when banks and relatives fail them. I slipped the check inside, folded once, not all of it, but enough to make a dent in someone else's fear. The receptionist thanked me quietly. Her voice sounded like someone who understood the relief that comes from turning private hurt into public good. If anything of my misfortune could prevent another woman from waking to find her name written in someone else's ledger, it was worth it. When I left, I felt lighter, not because the money was gone, but because the choice had been mine. I had taken back one more thing, the right to decide. At home I found a small stack of apology letters and messages, not all sincere perhaps, but sincere enough to be noticed. A neighbor who used to call only at Christmas had written, "If you need anything, please tell me." An old babysitter sent a postcard, "So proud of your courage." The kindness of strangers and the belated conscience of relatives do not cancel the harm, but they do remind you there are people who will stand with you when it matters. That night I woke before dawn. I wrapped myself in Harold's old cardigan and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool and smelled faintly of wet earth. The sky was a soft, beginning blue. The first light moved like a slow hand across the treetops. Sunrises are honest things. They don't hide, they reveal. They come regardless of our wounds or our plans. I stood there, barefoot on the porch boards, and let the new light touch the house, the mailbox, the driveway Harold used to sweep every Saturday. "Harold," I whispered, as if the wind might carry it, "we kept our dignity." A breeze lifted the hem of my cardigan. The sun pushed gold into the yard. For the first time in a long while, my heart felt quiet in a good way, not empty, but rightly filled. Justice had been served in the narrow, exact way of filings and seals. But dignity, that was a quiet thing between us that no forged signature could steal. I stayed until the sun rose full and the birds began their busy songs. Then I went back inside, wiped one more corner of the table, and made a pot of tea. The work of living, small, steady, and mine, resumed. 6 months later, the house still smelled faintly of lemon and Harold's tobacco tin, small comforts that anchor the morning. "The garden is coaxing itself back to life," I water the rosemary Harold insisted on, stubborn as his laugh. Life looks ordinary, and ordinary is a kind of grace. Neighbors began dropping by the community center asking, "How do I check my accounts?" Or, "What if a form looks wrong?" That's when I realized I could do more than tidy the table. I could teach. Digital Safety for Seniors was a simple name for what we do. We meet in the church basement on Wednesday afternoons, sit in a circle, and I show folks how to read an email without panic, how to spot a fake notary, why no bank will call and ask for your PIN. We practice with phones and sample forms. We laugh at our awkwardness, and we remind each other of the things technology can't take: sense, memory, and good judgment. People ask if I'm bitter. Sometimes it's polite, sometimes it's not. The truth is, bitterness is a heavy coat, and I took it off. So I teach, I donate, I listen. And then, inevitably, they ask about Mark. That is the question everyone leans forward to ask, faces soft with pain. There are things the courts decide, and things I keep between quiet weather and my own heartbeat. I will say this: people were held accountable, repairs were made. Whether there will be forgiveness, that's a separate door. I will choose if and when I walk through it. Now a word for you listening. If someone says you're too old to handle money, decisions, or life, remember, age accumulates wisdom, not weakness. Wrinkles are not a vulnerability. They're a map of what you've endured. Protect your dignity. Teach someone else to protect theirs. One last thing. Would you forgive your own child after something like this? Tell me in the comments. I read them. We'll read them together. It won't be easy, but honesty is how we start again. If Evelyn's story touched you, tell us where you're watching from. Hit like if this helped, and subscribe for more true stories about people reclaiming the life they built. Slow, steady, and honest. Thank you for listening. Keep your papers organized, your passwords private, and your dignity close.